Welcome to Storytime at the Taleteller Club.
The Thousand Quilt from Rebecca Mary by Annie Hamilton Donnell. Recorded for Love Stories, Volume 3 by Rita Boutros. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Thousand Quilt from Rebecca Mary by Annie Hamilton Donnell. "Good afternoon," Rebecca Mary said politely. The minister's wife was cutting little trousers out of big ones, the minister's big ones. It was the old puzzle of how to steer clear of the thin places. "Boys grow so," sighed tenderly the minister's wife over her work. She had not heard the voice from the doorway. "Good afternoon," again. It was a quaint little figure in tight red calico standing there. It might easily have stepped down from some old picture on the wall. Rebecca Mary had a bundle in her arms. It was so large that it obscured breast and face, and only a pair of grave blue eyes, presided over by thin light brows, seemed visible to the minister's wife. The trousers puzzle merged into this one. Now who could— Oh, it's Miss Plummer's little girl, Rebecca," she said cordially. Rebecca Mary, her niece, came, a little muffled, from behind the great bundle. "Rebecca Mary's niece? Oh, you mean Miss Plummer's niece, and your whole name is that. But I suppose she calls you Rebecca or Becky for short? Walk in, Rebecca." But Rebecca Mary was struggling with the paralyzing vision of Aunt Olivia calling her Becky. She had passed by the lesser wonder of being called Rebecca without the Mary. "Oh, no'm, indeed. Aunt Livia never shortens me," gently gasped the child. And the minister's wife, measuring from the bundle down, smiled to herself. There did not seem much room for shortening. "But walk in, dear. You are going to walk in. I hope you have come to make me a little call." Rebecca Mary struggled out of her paralysis. Here was occasion for new embarrassment. For Rebecca Mary was honest. "No'm, I mean not a little call. I've come to spend the afternoon," she said slowly, "and I've brought my work." The bundle, the great bundle, was her work. She advanced into the room and began carefully to unroll it. It was the turn of the minister's wife to be paralyzed. She pushed forward a chair, and the child sat down in it. "It's my thousand quilt that I'm making for Aunt Livia," explained Rebecca Mary. "It's most done. There's 1,000 pieces in it, and I'm on the 991th. I thought probably you'd have some work, so I brought mine." "Yes, I see." The minister's wife stood looking down at the tight little red figure among the gorgeous waves of the thousand quilt. They eddied and surged around it in dizzy reds and purples and greens. She was conscious of being a little seasick, and for relief she turned back to the puzzle of the little trousers. It had been in her mind at first to express sorrow at Rhoda's being unfortunately away, and the boys. Now she was glad she hadn't, for it was quite plain enough that the visitor had not come to spend the afternoon with the minister's children, but with the minister's wife. "It isn't she that's young, it's I," thought the minister's wife with kind, laughing eyes. "She's old enough to be my mother. How old are you, dear?" she added aloud. "Me? I guess you mean Aunt Livia, don't you? It's Aunt Livia's birthday I'm making it for. It's going to be a present. Once she gave me a present on my birthday." Once! The minister's wife remembered Rhoda's birthdays and the boys'. Taken all together, such a host of little birthdays. But this little old visitor seemed to have had but one. "My birthday is 2 days quicker than Aunt Livia's is," volunteered the visitor sociably. "We're most twins, you see. Aunt Livia was 56 that time she gave me the present. She's a-going to be 59 when I give her this quilt. It's taken me ever since to make it." The minister's wife looked up from her cutting. So Rebecca Mary was only 59. "It's quite a long quilt," sighed Rebecca Mary. But pride woke in her eyes as she gazed out on the splendors of the green and purple sea. A thousand quilt has so many stitches in it, but when you sew 'em all yourself, when you sew every single stitch. The pride in Rebecca Mary's grave blue eyes grew and grew. Robert, the minister's wife said that night to the minister, it's an awful quilt, but you ought to have seen her eyes. It's taken her 3 years to make it. Maybe you wouldn't be proud yourself. Maybe you wouldn't if Rhoda had made it. Rhoda! Robert, she sewed one square of patchwork once, and it made her sick. I had to put her to bed. Speaking of once reminds me. Once Rebecca Mary had a birthday present, Robert. She waited a little anxiously for him to understand. The minister always understood, but sometimes he made her wait. "Felicia, are you trying to make me cry?" he said, and she was satisfied. She went across to him, as she always did when she wanted to cry herself. The floor was strewn with the tiniest boys' engine and cars, and she remembered as she zigzagged among them that they had been one of his very last birthday presents. It was Robert, what do you think the present was? I'll give you 3 guesses, but I advise you to guess a rooster. Thomas Jefferson, murmured the minister, as one who was acquainted. Yes, that is his name. How did you remember? She is very fond of him. He is her intimest friend, she says. So she is under great obligations to her aunt. It's a large quilt, but it's none too large to cover Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to help her buy a lining and cotton batting. Cracked corn will make a good lining, but Robert, this is not a comedy. If you'd seen Rebecca Mary and the quilt, you'd call it a tragedy. You couldn't surprise me any if you told me she'd quilted it herself. Down the road from Aunt Olivia's farm, across its southern boundary fence, romped and shouted all day long the Tony Trumbullses. No one, except possibly their mother, was quite certain how many of them there were. It was a dizzy process to take their senses. They were never still, in little brown bare limbs, nor shrill voices. From sunup to sundown, the Tony Trumbullses raced and laughed. Certainly they were happy. The minister's wife had not dared to tell her caller of the afternoon that the minister's children were down there shouting and racing with the little Tony Trumbullses. Dear no, not after Rebecca Mary, in the course of conversation, had said that Aunt Olivia did not countenance the Tony Trumbullses. Rebecca Mary did not say countenance, but it meant that. Her aunt won't let her play with them, Robert. And she'd like to. You needn't tell me Rebecca Mary wouldn't like to. I saw it in her poor little solemn eyes. Besides, she said she asked her aunt once to let her. Robert, aunts are cruel. I never knew it before. They've no business bringing up little Rebecca Marys. My dear Felicia. But in the minister's eyes was agreement. Aunt Olivia took afternoon naps with punctilious regularity. Aunt Olivia herself was punctilious regularity. At 1:30, day upon day, she hung up the dish towel, hung up her kitchen apron, and walked with unswerving course into her bedroom. There, disposed upon the dainty bed, in rigid lines of unrest, she rested. The naps were often long ones. A little after the afternoon that Rebecca Mary spent at the minister's, the birthday quilt was finished. The 1000th tiny piece was neatly over and overed to its gorgeous expanse. But Rebecca Mary was not content. She longed to make it complete. She wanted to surprise Aunt Livia with it, as Aunt Livia, on that momentous birthday of her own, had surprised her with the little fluff ball of yellow down that had grown into Thomas Jefferson. That had been such a beautiful surprise. But this! Aunt Livia had seen the quilt so many, many times. She had taught Rebecca Mary's stiff little fingers to set the first stitches in it. She had made her rip out this purple square and that pink checked one, and this one and that one and that. Oh, Aunt Livia was acquainted with the quilt. It would not be much of a surprise. But Rebecca Mary set her little pointed chin between her little brown palms and pondered. And out of the pondering grew a plan so ambitious and so daring that Rebecca Mary gasped in the throes of it. But she held her ground and entertained it intrepidly. She even grew on friendly terms with it in the end. Here was a way to surprise Aunt Livia. Rebecca Mary would do it. That it would entail an almost endless amount of work did not daunt her. Rebecca Mary was a plumber, and plumbers were not to be daunted. The long vista of patient hours of trying labor that the plan opened up before her set her blood tingling, like a warrior's on the eve of battle. What were long, patient hours to a plumber? Rebecca Mary girded up her loins and went to meet them. Thereafter, at Aunt Olivia's nap times, Rebecca Mary disappeared. Day after day, week upon week, she stole quietly away when the door of Aunt Olivia's bedroom shut. The first time she went oddly loaded down with what would have appeared, if there had been any one for it to appear, to be a bundle of long sticks. She made 2 trips into the unknown that first day. The second time, the bundle looked much like that one over which her grave blue eyes had peered at the minister's wife when she went to spend the afternoon with her. It was spring when the mysterious disappearances began. It was summer before Aunt Olivia woke up, not from her nap, but from her inattention. Quite suddenly she came upon the realization that Rebecca Mary was not about the house, nor about the grounds, for she instituted prompt search. She went to all the child's odd little haunts, the grapery, the orchard, the cornhouse, even to her own beloved backyard, full of sweet-scented hiding nooks dear to a child, but sacred ground to Aunt Olivia. Rebecca Mary sometimes did her stents there as a special privilege. She might be there now, unprivileged. Aunt Olivia's backyard was almost as full of flowery delights to Rebecca Mary as it was to Aunt Olivia. The child was not there, not anywhere. Aunt Olivia sought for Thomas Jefferson to inquire of him, but Thomas Jefferson was missing too. She went the rounds again. Where could the child be? It was a hot, stinging day in late June when Aunt Olivia's suspicions awoke. They had been long in rousing, but once alert, they developed rapidly into certainties. Her pale eyes glistened, her thin nostrils dilated. Aunt Olivia's whole lean, sharp, unemotional person put on suspicion. The child had gone to see the Tony Trumboses. "My land!" ejaculated Aunt Olivia. "After all my forbidding! And she a plumber!" She sat down suddenly as though a little faint. She had never known a plumber to disobey before. It was a new experience. It took time to get used to it, and she sat still a long time, rigid and grim, on the edge of the chair. Then, as suddenly as she had sat down, she got up. It could not be. She refused to entertain the suspicion longer. Rebecca Mary had not gone there, to that forbidden place. She was in the garden somewhere. Aunt Olivia, a little stiff as if from a chill, went once more in search of the child. "Rebecca! Rebecca Mary!" she called at regular intervals. Then sharply, "Rebecca Mary Plummer!" Her voice had thin cadences of suspicion lurking in it against its will. But there seemed really no doubt. One by one, incriminating circumstances occurred to Aunt Olivia. Rebecca Mary had longed to go so much. The Tony Trumboses, one at a time or in a tumultuous body, had urged her so often. She herself had more than once caught the child gazing wistfully, in passing by, at the bewildering, deafening frolics of the little Tony Trumboses. Once Rebecca Mary had asked to go barefoot as they went. Once she had let out the tight little braids in her neck and rumpled her thin little hair. Once Aunt Olivia had come upon her playing. The remembrance of it now tightened the lines around Aunt Olivia's lips. The child had been running wildly about the yard, shouting in a strange, excited, ridiculous way. When Aunt Olivia, in stern displeasure, had demanded explanations, she had run on recklessly, calling back over her shoulder, "Don't stop me! I'm a Tony Trumbull!" "My land!" breathed Aunt Olivia, taking back the suspicion to her breast. "After all my forbidding, she's gone down there. She's been going down there dear knows how long. She's waited till I took my naps, and then went. A plumber!" There was really nowhere else she could have gone. She had never wanted to go anywhere else except to the minister's. and Rebecca Mary was punctilious and would not think of going there again till the minister's wife had returned her visit. But Aunt Olivia waited. As usual, she went to her room next day at nap time and closed the door behind her. But when a little figure slipped down the road towards the forbidden place a moment later, she was watching behind her blinds. She was groaning as if in pain. The little figure began to run staidly. Aunt Olivia groaned again. The child was in a hurry to get there. She couldn't wait to walk. There was guilt in every motion of the little figure. "And she runs like a plumber," groaned Aunt Olivia. The next day and the next, Aunt Olivia watched behind her blinds. The fourth day she put on her afternoon dress and followed the hurrying little figure. Not at once. Aunt Olivia did not hurry. There was a sad reluctance in every movement. It seemed a terrible thing to be following Rebecca Mary Plummer, to a forbidden place. Afar off, Aunt Olivia heard faintly the shoutings that always heralded an approach to the Tony Trumboses, and shuddered. The tumult kept growing clearer. She thought she detected a wild, excited little shout that might be Rebecca Mary's. Her thin lips set into a stern, straight line. A splash of red caught Aunt Olivia's eye as she drew nearer the joyous whirl of little children. Rebecca Mary wore a little tight red dress. The coil seemed closing in about the child. Close to the southern boundary fence of Aunt Olivia's land stood an old empty barn. It had been a place for storing surplus hay once, when there had been surplus hay. For many years now it had been empty. As Aunt Olivia approached it, she noticed that its great sliding door was open. Strange, when for so long it had been shut. "If that old barn door ain't open!" breathed Aunt Olivia, stopping in her astonishment. "I ain't seen it open before in these 10 years. Now what I want to know is, who opened it? Likely as not those screeching little wild Injuns." She strode across the stubby grass ground to the barn and peered into its cool, dim depths. Then Aunt Olivia uttered a little bewildered cry. Gradually the dimness took on light, and the whole startling picture within unfolded itself to her astonished eyes. Rebecca Mary was quilting. She was stooping earnestly over a gay expanse of purples and reds and greens. Her little tight red back was towards Aunt Olivia. It looked bent and strained. Rebecca Mary's eyes were very close to the gay expanse. Suddenly Rebecca Mary began to speak, and Aunt Olivia's widened eyes discovered a great white rooster pecking about under the quilt. His big snowy bulk stood out distinct in the shadow of it. "I'm glad we're almost through. Aren't you, Thomas Jefferson? It's been a pretty long quilt. You get sort of tired when you quilt a long quilt. It makes your back creak when you unbend it. And when you quilt in a barn, of course you can't see without squinching, and it hurts your eyes to squinch." Silence again, except for the industrious peck peck of the great white rooster. Aunt Olivia stood very still. "You've been a great help, Thomas Jefferson," began again the voice of Rebecca Mary after a little. "I'm very much obliged to you, as I've said before. I don't know what I should have done without you. No, you needn't answer. I couldn't hear a word you said. You can't hear with cotton in both of your ears." Rebecca Mary sighed. There was no cotton in Aunt Olivia's ears to shut out the soft little sound. "But of course you have to wear it in, on account of your conscience. It's conscience cotton, Thomas Jefferson. I've explained before, but I don't know's you understood. It seems a little unpolite to wear it in my ears, with you here keeping me company. I suppose you think it's unsociable. But Aunt Olivia doesn't allow me to associate with the Tony Trumboses. Oh, Thomas Jefferson, I wish she'd allowed me to associate." Aunt Olivia found herself wishing she had conscience cotton in both of her ears. "They're such nice, cheerful little children. It makes you want to go right over their fence and hollow, too." Rebecca Mary pronounced it hollow with careful precision. Aunt Olivia would not approve of holler. "And when you can't, you like to listen. But I suppose listening to them hollow would be 'sociating, so I put the cotton in." The joyous hallooing broke in waves of glee on Aunt Olivia's eardrums. It seemed to be assaulting her heart. Oddly, now it did not sound unmannerly and dreadful. It sounded nice and cheerful. A plumber even might be happy like that. "Cotton is a very strange experience, Thomas Jefferson," ran on the little voice. "At first you most can't stand it, but you get over the worst of it by and by. Besides, we're getting most through now. Ain't that splendid, Thomas Jefferson? And it's pretty lucky, too, because Aunt Livia's birthday is getting very near. It almost scares me. Doesn't it you? For I don't know how Aunt Livia looks when she's pleased. You think she'll look pleased, don't you, Thomas Jefferson? It's such a long quilt, and when you've sewed every stitch yourself." If Rebecca Mary had turned round then, she would have seen how Aunt Livia looked when she was pleased. But the little figure at the quilting frame bent steadily to its task. Only another soft sigh stealing into Aunt Olivia's uncottoned ears. Thomas Jefferson pecked his way towards the open door, and the lean figure there started back guiltily. Aunt Olivia did not want to be recognized. "You there under the quilt, Thomas Jefferson?" The little voice put on tenderness. "Because I'm a-going to tell you something. Once Aunt Livia gave me a birthday present, and it was you. Such a little mite of a yellow chicken. That's why I'm making the quilt for Aunt Livia. It was 3 years ago. I've loved you ever since," added Rebecca Mary simply. For an instant Aunt Olivia stopped being a plumber. A sob crept into her throat. "Rebecca, Rebecca Mary, Rebecca Mary Plummer!" she cried involuntarily. Then she stepped back hastily, glad for the cotton in Rebecca Mary's ears. For the surprise, she must not spoil the child's hard-earned surprise. And besides, Aunt Olivia wanted to be surprised. It was a relief to get away. She could not look any longer at the picture in the great cobwebby barn. The gorgeous quilt spread out to its full extent, the empty scaffolds above Rebecca Mary stooping to her work, Thomas Jefferson pecking about the floor. Aunt Olivia was not old. Through all the years ahead of her she would remember that picture. She went straight to the southern boundary fence and looked across at the jubilant little Tony Trumboses. The one in a red dress like Rebecca Mary's she singled out with a pointing finger. "You! Come here," she called. "I won't hurt you. No need to look scared. Do you know who I am? I'm Rebecca Mary's aunt. You know who Rebecca Mary is, don't you?" "Gracious!" shrilled the little red Tony Trumbull, which Aunt Olivia took for yes. "Well, then, you know where I live. You see here, I want you all, the whole kit of you, to come to my house tomorrow morning to see Rebecca Mary. I'm going to say it over again. Tomorrow morning to see Rebecca Mary," setting apart the syllables with the pointing finger. "You can play in my backyard," said Aunt Olivia, sublimely unconscious of slang. End of The Thousand Quilt from Rebecca Mary by Annie Hamilton Donnell.
For Herself or for Another by Valerie Brussoff. Recorded for Love Stories Volume 3 by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. For Herself or for Another by Valerie Brussoff. Section 1. Is it she? No, it can't be. But yet, of course, it is, said Peter Andreevich Bosmanoff to himself, as a lady who had previously attracted his attention passed for the 5th or 6th time the little table at which he was sitting. He no longer doubted that it was Elizaveta. Certainly, they had not met for nearly 12 years, and no woman's face could remain unchanged during such a period. The features, formerly thin and sharply defined, had become somewhat fuller. The glance, once confiding as a child, was now cold and stern, and in the whole face there was an expression of self-confidence which used not to be there. But were they not the same eyes which Bosmanoff had loved to liken to St. Elmo's fires? Was it not that same oval which by its purity of outline alone had often calmed his passion? Were they not the same tiny ears which he had found so sweet to kiss? Yes, it must be Elizaveta. There could not be two women so much alike, as the reflections in two adjoining mirrors. Bosmanoff's mind went quickly over the history of his love for Elizaveta. Not for the first time did he thus survey it. For all of his memories, none was dearer or more sacred than this love. The young advocate, just stepping forth into life, had met a woman somewhat older than himself, who had loved him with all the blindness of a fierce, unreasoning, ecstatical passion. Elizaveta's whole soul had been absorbed by this love, and nothing else in the world had mattered to her except this one thing: to possess her beloved, give herself to him, worship him. She had been prepared to sacrifice all the conventions of their set. She had begged Bosmanoff to allow her to leave her husband and go live with him. And in society, not only had she not been ashamed of her connection with him, which of course had been talked about, but she had, as it were, gloried in it. Bosmanoff had never since come across a love so self-forgetful, so ready to sacrifice itself, and he could not have doubted that if at any time he had demanded of Elizaveta that she should kill herself, she would have fulfilled his behest with a calm, submissive rapture. How had Bosmanoff profited by such a love, which comes to us only once in life? He had been afraid of it, afraid of its immensity and its strength. He had understood that where infinite sacrifices are made, they were necessarily accompanied by great demands. He had been afraid to accept this love because it would have been necessary to give something in exchange for it, and he felt himself spiritually lacking. And he had been afraid that his just blossoming career might be checked. Bosmanoff, like a thief, had stolen half a year's love, which could not have been his had he been frank and shown his real character from the first. And then he had taken advantage of the first trifling excuse to break off the connection. Ah, how ashamed he was now to recall their last meeting before this took place. Elizaveta, blinded by her love for him, could not understand, could not see that her beloved was too low for her to abase herself before him, and she had begged him on her knees not to forsake her. He remembered how she, sobbing, had embraced his feet and let herself be dragged along the floor, how in despair she had beaten her head against the wall. He had learnt afterwards that his desertion had sent Elizaveta nearly out of her mind, that at one time she had wished to enter a convent, and that later, when she became a widow, she had gone abroad. Since then, he had lost all trace of her. Was it possible that here at Interlaken he was meeting her now again, 12 years after their rupture, calm, stern, beautiful as ever, with her inexplicable fascination for him and her tormentingly sweet reminders of the past? Bosmanoff, sitting at the little cafe table, watching the tall lady in the large Paris hat as she went by, and his whole being burned feverishly with images and sensations of the past, suffusing in a moment the memory of his mind and the memory of his body. It was she. It was she. Elizaveta, whom he had not allowed to love him as fully as she had wished, and whom he himself had not dared to love as fully as he might, as much as he had wished. It was she, his better half, restored again to him when his life had almost passed. She, alive still, the possibility incarnate of reviving that which had been, of completing and restoring it. In spite of his self-possession, Bosmanov's head was in a whirl. He paid the waiter for his ice, got up from his seat, and walked out by the path along which the tall lady had passed. Section 2. When Bosmanov overtook the tall lady, he raised his hat deferentially and bowed to her. But the lady showed no sign of recognition. "Is it possible you do not recognize me, Elizaveta Vassilievna?" asked Bosmanov, speaking in Russian. After some hesitation, the lady answered in Russian, though with a slight accent. "Pardon me, but you've probably made a mistake. I am not an acquaintance of yours." "Elizaveta Vassilievna!" exclaimed Bosmanov, deeply hurt by such a reply. "Surely you must recognize me. I am Peter Andreevich Bosmanov." "It's the first time I've heard that name," said the lady, "and I don't know you at all." For several seconds Bosmanov gazed at the lady who thus spoke to him, asking himself whether he had not made a mistake. But there was such an undoubted likeness, he so definitely recognized her as Elizaveta, that blocking up the pathway to this lady in the large Paris hat, he repeated insistently, "I recognize you, Elizaveta Vassilievna. I understand that you may have reasons for concealing your true name. I understand that you may not wish to meet your former acquaintances, but you must know that it's absolutely necessary for me to speak a few words to you. I have gone through too much since we separated. I must put myself right with you. I don't want you to despise me." Bosmanov hardly knew himself what he was saying. He wanted only one thing, that Elizaveta would acknowledge that it was she. He was afraid that she might go away, and not come back, might vanish for evermore, and that this meeting might prove to be a dream. The lady moved quietly to one side, and said in French, "Monsieur, laissez-moi passer, s'il vous plaît. Je ne vous connais pas." She showed no agitation whatever, and at Bosmanov's words the expression of her face did not change in the least. But all the same he could not let her go, but followed her. "Elizaveta," he cried, "curse me if you will, call me the most worthless of men, tell me that you no longer wish to know me. I will take it all humbly as I ought, but do not pretend that you do not recognize me. That I cannot endure. You dare not, ought not, to insult me so." "I assure you," the lady interrupted in a more severe tone, "that you mistake me for someone else. You call me Elizaveta Vassilievna, but that is not my name. I am Ekaterina Vladimirovna Sadikova, and my maiden name was Armand. Surely that is sufficient evidence for you to allow me to continue my walk as I wish to do." "But why, then," cried Bosmanov, making a last attempt, "why have you borne with me so long? If I am an utter stranger to you, why don't you at once order me to be silent, or call a policeman? No one behaves as gently as you have done towards a scoundrel of the street." "I see quite clearly," answered the lady, "that you are not a street scoundrel, and that you would not allow yourself to take any liberties. You've simply made a mistake. My likeness to some lady of your acquaintance has led you into an error. That is no crime, and I've no occasion whatever to call the police. But now everything has been explained. Goodbye." Bosmanov could insist no longer. He stood aside, and the lady walked slowly past him. But the whole of the conversation, the tone of the lady's voice, her movements, everything about her only accentuated his belief that this was Elizaveta. Disturbed and agitated, he went back to his room at the hotel. Beyond the green meadow, like some gigantic phantom, showed the eternal snow of the Jungfrau. It seemed near, but was immeasurably far. Was it not like to Elizaveta, who had seemed risen from the dead, but who had again retreated into the far unknown? It was not difficult for Bosmanov to discover the address of the lady whom he had met. After some hesitation, he wrote her a letter in which he said that he had no wish to argue about what was evident. He had clearly made a mistake in taking an unknown lady for an old acquaintance of his, but their short encounter had made a deep impression on him, and he begged permission to bow to her when they met, in memory of an accidental acquaintance. The letter was couched in extremely cautious and respectful terms. When on the following day Bosmanov met the lady who called herself Madame Sadikova, she bowed to him first, and herself began to speak to him, and so their acquaintance began. Section 3. Madame Sadikova gave no signs of ever having previously known Bosmanov. Quite the contrary. She treated him as someone whom she had never met before. They talked about unimportant matters, connected chiefly with the life at the watering place. Madame Sadikova's conversation was interesting and clever, and she appeared to be very well read. But when Bosmanov tried to pass to more intimate, more painful questions, his companion lightly and deftly evaded them. Everything convinced Bosmanov that she was Elizaveta. He recognized her voice, her favorite turns of speech, recognized that intangible something which expresses the individuality of a person, but which is difficult to define in words. He could have sworn that he was not mistaken. Certainly there were slight marks of difference, but could not these be explained by the interval of 12 years? It was natural that from Elizaveta's flaming passions the experience of life should have forged a steely coldness. It was natural that, living abroad for many years, Elizaveta could have somewhat forgotten her native tongue and speak it with an accent. Finally, it was natural that in her behavior, in her gestures, in her laughter, there should appear a few features which had not been there before. All the same, Bosmanov was sometimes seized by doubt, and then he began mentally to notice hundreds of tiny peculiarities which distinguished Ekaterina from Elizaveta. But he only needed to look once more into Madame Sadikova's face to hear her speak, and all his doubts would disperse like a mist. He felt in himself, and his soul was aware that this was she whom he had once loved. Of course, he did all he could to unravel the mystery. He tried to confuse her by asking unexpected questions. She was always on her guard, and she easily escaped out of all of his snares. He tried to question her acquaintances. No one knew anything about her. He even went so far as to intercept a letter addressed to her. It proved to be from Paris, and consisted only of impersonal French phrases. One evening, when the two were together in a restaurant, Bosmanov could endure the continuous strain no longer, and he suddenly exclaimed, "Why do we keep up this tormenting game? You are Elizaveta, I am sure of it. You can't forget how you once loved me, and of course you can't forget how basely I cast you off. But now I bring you all my soul's repentance. I despise myself for my former conduct. This is what I propose. Take me for the whole of my life if you can forgive me. But I say this to Elizaveta, I give myself to her, not to any other woman." Madame Sadikova listened in silence to this little speech. transgressing as it did the limits of society's small talk, and answered calmly, "Dear Peter Andreevich, if you are speaking to me, I might answer you, perhaps. But as you warn me that you are speaking to Elizaveta, there's nothing for me to say." In the greatest excitement, Bosmanoff got up from his seat and asked her, "Do you wish to insist that you are not Elizaveta? Well, say so once more to my face without blenching, and I will go away. I will at once hide myself from your eyes. I will vanish out of your life. Then there will be no more reason for my living." Madame Sadikova smiled sweetly. "Do you wish so much that I were Elizaveta?" asked she. "Very well, I will be Elizaveta." Section 4. Then the second game began, a more cruel one perhaps than the first. Madame Sadikova called herself Elizaveta and treated Bosmanoff as an old acquaintance. When he spoke of the past, she pretended to remember the persons and events of which he spoke. When he, all trembling, reminded her of her love for him, she, laughing, agreed that she had loved him, but she hinted that in the course of time this love had died down, as every flame dies down. In order to play her part conscientiously, Madame Sadikova herself would sometimes speak of the happenings of the past, but she mixed up the dates, remembered the wrong names, imagined things which had never occurred. It was especially tormenting that when she spoke of her love for Bosmanoff, she referred to it as a light flirtation, the accidental amusement of a lady in society. This seemed to Bosmanoff an insult to sacred things, and almost with a wail he besought her to be silent. But this was little. Imperceptibly, step by step, Madame Sadikova poisoned all of Bosmanoff's most holy recollections. By her hints, she discrowned all the most beautiful facts of the past. She gave him to understand that much of what had appeared to him as evidence of her self-forgetful love had been only hypocrisy and make-believe. "Elizaveta," implored Bosmanoff once of her, "is it possible for me to believe that your passionate vows, your sobs, your despair when you threw yourself unconscious on the floor, that all this was feigned? The most talented dramatic actress could not act so well. You are defaming yourself." Madame Sadikova, answering to the name of Elizaveta, as she had been doing for some time, said with a smile, "How can one distinguish where acting ends and sincerity begins? I wanted at that time to feel strongly, and so I allowed myself to pretend to be despairing and out of my senses. If in your place had been not you, but some other, I should have acted just the same. And yet, at that very moment, it would have cost me nothing to overcome myself and not sob at all. Aren't we all like that in life? Actors? We don't so much live as act the part of living." "That's not true," exclaimed Bosmanoff. "You say this because you do not know how Elizaveta loved. She would never have spoken so. You are only playing her part. It's evident that you are not she. You are Ekaterina." Madame Sadikova laughed, and then said in a different tone, "Just as you like, Peter Andreevich. I only played the part to please you. If you wish it, I will become myself again, Ekaterina Vladimirovna Sadikova." "How can I know where you are real?" For some minutes he doubted who he was himself. In the meantime, Madame Sadikova got up and proposed a walk, and she again began to speak to him as Elizaveta. Section 5. The days went by. The season at Interlaken came to an end. Bosmanoff, obsessed by his connection with this mysterious acquaintance of his, began to forget everything else, forgot why he had come to Interlaken, forget all his business, answered no letters from home, lived a sort of senseless life. Like a maniac, he thought only of one thing, how to guess the secret of Elizaveta Ekaterina. Was he in love with this woman? He could not have said. She drew him to herself as to an abyss, as to a horror, to a place of destruction. Months and years might go by, and he would be glad to go on with this duel of mind and ready wit, this struggle of two minds, one of which sought to preserve her secret, and the other strove to tear it from her. But suddenly, early in October, Madame Sadikova left Interlaken. She went away, neither saying good-bye to Bosmanov nor warning him of her departure. On the following day, however, he received a letter from her, posted from Bern. "I will not deprive you of the satisfaction of guessing who I am," wrote Madame Sadikova. "I leave the solution of this problem to your sharp wit. But if you are tired of guessing and would like to have the simplest solution, I will tell it you. Suppose that I was really a complete stranger to you. Learning from your own agitated accounts how cruelly you had once treated a certain Elizaveta, I determined to avenge her. I think I have attained my object. My revenge has been accomplished. You will never forget these weeks of torture at Interlaken. And for whom I took this vengeance? For myself or for another? Is it not all the same in the long run? Goodbye. You will never see me again. Elizaveta Ekaterina. End of For Herself or For Another by Valery Brusov.
The New Heloise, a short story excerpted from the full-length novel Julie, the New Heloise by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The editor-translators of this short arrangement are Arthur Mee and J.A. Hamerton, presented in an anthology called The World's Greatest Books, Volume 7. This story is recorded as a duet for Love Stories, Volume 3, by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida, and Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. William will read the letters of Saint Preux, Julie's lover, also the letters of Edouard Bonston, Julie's, Claire's, and Saint Preux's best friend, and finally the letters of Monsieur de Woolmar. Michelle will read the letters of Julie and her cousin Claire, and letters addressed from Madame de Orbe, that's Claire after she marries Monsieur de Orbe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The New Heloise. Excerpt from the introduction. Rousseau's Julie, the New Heloise, published in 1760, was founded on the historic love of Abelard and Heloise. Rousseau's primary intention was to reveal, through a series of letters, a very early form of an epistolary novel, the effect of passion upon persons of simple but lofty nature, unspoiled by the artificialities of society. And several passages in the book are ranked among the classics of French literature. So, without further ado,
The New Heloise by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Section 1. The Course of True Love. To Julie. I must escape from you, mademoiselle. I must see you no more. You know that I entered your house as tutor to yourself and your cousin, Mademoiselle Claire, at your mother's invitation. I did not foresee the peril. At any rate, I did not fear it. I shall not say that I am now paying the price for my rashness, for I trust I shall never fail in the respect due to your high birth, your beauty, and your noble character. But I confess that you have captured my heart. How could I fail to adore the touching union of keen sensibility and unchanging sweetness, the tender pity, all those spiritual qualities that are worth so much more to me than personal charms? I have lost my reason. I promise to strive to recover it. You and you alone can help me. Forbid me from appearing in your presence. Show this letter, if you like, to your parents. Drive me away. I can endure anything from you. I am powerless to escape of my own accord.
From Julie. I must then reveal my secret. I have striven to resist, but I am powerless. Everything seems to magnify my love for you. All nature seems to be your accomplice. Every effort that I make is in vain. I adore you in spite of myself. I hope and I believe that a heart which has seemed to me to deserve the whole attachment of mine will not belie the generosity that I expect of it. And I hope also that if you should prove unworthy of the devotion I feel for you, my indignation and contempt will restore to me the reason that my love has caused me to lose.
To Julie. Oh, how am I to realize the torrent of delights that pours into my heart? And how can I best reassure the alarms of a timid and loving woman? Pure and heavenly beauty, judge more truly, I beseech you, of the nature of your power. Believe me, if I adore your loveliness, it is because of the spotless soul of which that loveliness is the outward token. When I cease to love virtue, I shall cease to love you, and I shall no longer ask you to love me.
From Julie. My friend, I feel that every day I become more attached to you. The smallest absence from you is insupportable, and when you are not with me, I must needs write you so that I may occupy myself with you unceasingly. My mind is troubled with news that my father has just told me. He is expecting a visit from his old friend, Monsieur de Volmar, and I suspect it is to Monsieur de Volmar that he designs that I should be married. I cannot marry without the approval of those who gave me life, and you know what the fury of my father would be if I were to confess my love for you, for he would assuredly not suffer me to be united with one whom he deems my inferior in that mere worldly rank for which I care nothing. Yet I cannot marry a man I do not love, and you are the only man I shall ever love. It pains me that I must not reveal our secret to my dear mother, who esteems you so highly. But would she not reveal it from a sense of duty to my father? It is best that only my inseparable cousin Claire should know the truth. From Claire to Julie. I have bad news for you, my dear cousin. First of all, your love affair is being gossiped about. Secondly, this gossip has indirectly brought your lover into serious danger. You have met my Lord Edouard Bonston, the young English noble who is now staying at Vevey. Your lover has been on terms of such warm friendship with him ever since they met at Sion some time ago that I could not believe they would ever have quarreled. Yet they quarreled last night, and about you. During the evening, Monsieur de Orbe tells me, my Lord Edouard drank freely and began to talk about you. Your lover was displeased and silent. My Lord Edouard, angered at his coldness, declared that he was not always cold, and that somebody, who should be nameless, caused him to behave in a very different manner. Your lover drew his sword instantly. My Lord Edouard drew also, but stumbled in his intoxication and injured his leg. Oh! In spite of Monsieur de Orbe's efforts to reconcile them, a meeting was arranged to take place as soon as my Lord Edouard's leg was better. You must prevent this duel somehow, for my Lord Edouard is a dangerous swordsman. Meanwhile, I am terrified lest the gossip about you should reach your father's ears. It would be best to get your lover to go away before any mischief comes to pass. From Julie to my Lord Edouard. I am told that you are about to fight the man whom I love, for it is true that I love him, and that he will probably die by your hand. Enjoy in advance, if you can, the pleasure of piercing the bosom of your friend, but be sure that you will not have that of contemplating my despair. For I swear that I shall not survive by one day the death of him who is to me as my life's breath. Thus you will have the glory of slaying with a single stroke 2 hapless lovers who have never willingly committed a fault towards you, and who have delighted to honor you.
To Julie. Have no fear for me, dearest Julie. Read this, and I am sure that you will share in my feelings of gratitude and affection towards the man with whom I have quarrelled. This morning my Lord Edouard entered my room, accompanied by 2 gentlemen. I have come, he said, to withdraw the injurious words that intoxication led me to utter in your presence. Pardon me, and restore me to your friendship. I am ready to endure any chastisement that you see fit to inflict upon me. My lord, I replied, I acknowledge your nobility of spirit. The words you uttered when you were not yourself are henceforth utterly forgotten. I embraced him, and he bade the gentleman to withdraw. When we were alone, he gave me the warmest testimonies of friendship, and, touched by his generosity, I told him the whole story of our love. He promised enthusiastically to do what he could to further our happiness, and this is the nobler in him, inasmuch as he admitted that he had himself conceived a tender admiration for you.
From Julie. Dearest, the worst has happened. My father knows of our love. He came to me yesterday, pale with fury. In his wrath he struck me. Then, suddenly, he took me in his arms and implored my forgiveness, but I know that he will never consent to our union. I shall never dare to mention your name in his presence. My love for you is unalterable. Our souls are linked by bonds that time cannot dissolve. And yet, my duty to my parents. How can I do right by wronging them? Oh, pity my distraction. It seems that my Lord Edouard impulsively asked my father for his consent to our union, telling him how deeply we loved each other, and that he would mortally injure his daughter's happiness if he denied her wishes. My father replied in bitter anger that he would never suffer his child to be united to a man of humble birth. My Lord Edouard hotly retorted that mere distinctions of birth were worthless when weighed in the scale with true refinement and true virtue. They had a long and violent argument, and parted in enmity. I must take counsel with Cousin Claire, who never suffers her reason to be clouded with those heart torments of which I am the unhappy victim. From Claire to Julie. On learning of your distress, dear cousin, I made up my mind that your lover must go away, for your sake and his own. I summoned Monsieur de Orbe and my Lord Edouard. I told Monsieur de Orbe that the success of his suit to me depended on his help to you. You know that my friendship for you is greater than any love can be. My Lord Edouard acted splendidly. He promised to endow your lover with 1/3 of his estate, and to take him to Paris and London, there to win the distinction that his talents deserve. Monsieur d'Orbe went to order a chaise, and I proceeded to your lover, and told him that it was his duty to leave at once. At first he passionately refused, then he yielded to despair. Then he begged to be allowed to see you once more. I refused. I urged that all delays were dangerous. His agony brought tears to my eyes, but I was firm. Monsieur d'Orbe led him away. My Lord Edouard was waiting with the chaise, and they are now on their way to Besançon and Paris.
Section 2. The Separation. To Julie. Why was I not allowed to see you before leaving? Did you fear that the parting would kill me? Be assured, I do not suffer. I think of you. I think of the time when I was dear to you. Nay, you love me yet, I know it. But why so cruelly drive me away? Say one word, and I return like the lightning. Ah, these babblings are but flung into empty air. I shall live and die far away from you. I have lost you forever. From my Lord Edward to Julie. Deep depression has succeeded violent grief in the mind of your lover, but I can count upon his heart. It is a heart framed to fight and to conquer. I have a proposition to make, which I hope you will carefully consider. In your happiness and your lover's, I have a tender and inextinguishable interest, since between you I perceive a deeper harmony than I have ever known to exist between man and woman. Your present misfortunes are due to my indiscretion. Let me do what I can to repair the fault. I have in Yorkshire an old castle and a large estate. They are yours and your lover's, Julie, if you will accept them. You can escape from Vevey with the aid of my valet when I have left there. You can join your lover, be wedded to him, and spend the rest of your days happily in the place of refuge I have designed for you. Reflect on this, I beseech you. I should add that I have said nothing of this project to your lover. The decision rests with you, and you alone.
From Julie to my Lord Edward. Your letter, my lord, fills me with gratitude and admiration. It would indeed be joy for me to gain happiness under the auspices of so generous a friend, and to procure from his kindness the contentment that fortune has denied me. But could contentment ever be granted to me if I had the consciousness of having pitilessly abandoned those who gave me birth? I am their only living child. All their pleasure, all their hope is in me. Can I deliver up their closing days to shame, regrets, and tears? No, my lord. Happiness could not be bought at such a price. I dare brave all the sorrows that await me here. Remorse I dare not brave. From Julie to her lover. I have just returned from the wedding of Claire and Monsieur de Orbe. You will, I know, share my pleasure in the happiness of our dearest friend, and such is the worth of the friendship that joins us, that the good fortune of one of us should be a real consolation for the sorrows of the other two. Continue to write me from Paris, but let me tell you that I am not pleased with the bitterness of your letters, a bitterness unworthy of my philosophic tutor of the happy bygone days at Vevey. I wish my true love to see all things clearly, and to be the just and honest man I have always deemed him, not a cynic who seeks a sorry comfort in misfortune by carping at the rest of mankind. From Madame de Orbe, Claire, to Julie's lover. I am about to ask of you a great sacrifice, but I know you will perceive it to be a necessary sacrifice, and I think that your devotion to Julie's true happiness will endure even this final test. Julie's mother has died, and Julie has tormented herself with the idea that her love troubles have hastened her parents' end. Since then she has had a serious illness, and is now in a depressed state both physically and mentally. Nothing, I am convinced, can cure her save absolute oblivion of the past and the beginning of a new life, a married life. Monsieur de Voldemar is here once more, and Julie's father will insist upon her union with him. This quiet, emotionless, observant man cannot win her love, but he can bring her peace. Will you cease from all correspondence with her and renounce all claim to her? Remember that Julie's whole future depends upon your answer. Her father will force her to obey him. Prove that you are worthy of her love by removing all obstacles to her obedience.
From Julie's lover to her father. I hereby renounce all claims upon the hand of Julie Etange, and acknowledge her right to dispose of herself in matrimony without consulting her heart.
From Madame d'Orbe, Claire, to Julie's lover. Julie is married. Give thanks to the heaven that has saved you both. Respect her new estate. Do not write to her, but wait to hear from her. Now is the time when I shall learn whether you are worthy of the esteem I have ever felt for you.
From my Lord Edward to Julie's lover. A squadron is fitting out at Plymouth for the tour of the globe, under the command of my old friend George Anson. I have obtained permission for you to accompany him. Will you go? From Julie's lover to Madame d'Orbe. I am starting, dear and charming cousin, for a voyage round the world, to seek in another hemisphere the peace I cannot enjoy in this. Adieu, tender and inseparable friends. May you make each other's happiness. Section 3. The Philosophic Husband. From Monsieur de Volmar to Saint Preux, pseudonym of Julie's lover. I learn that you have returned to Europe after all these years of travel. Although I have not as yet the pleasure of knowing you, permit me nevertheless to address you. The wisest and dearest of women has opened her heart to me. I believe that you are worthy of having been loved by her, and I invite you to our home. Innocence and peace reign within it. You will find there friendship, hospitality, esteem, and confidence. Signed, Volmar.
P.S. Come, my friend, we wait you with eagerness. Do not grieve me by a refusal. Julie.
From Saint Preux to my Lord Edward. I have seen her, my lord. She has called me her friend, her dear friend. I am happier than ever I was in my life. Yet, when I approached Monsieur de Volmar's house at Clarens, I was in a state of frantic nervousness. Could I bear to see my old love in the possession of another? Would I not be driven to despair? As the carriage neared Clarens, I wished that it would break down. When I dismounted, I awaited Julie in mortal anxiety. She came running, and calling out to me, she seized me in her arms, and all my terrors were banished. I knew no feeling but joy. Monsieur de Volmar, meanwhile, was standing beside us. She turned to him, introduced me to him as her old friend. If new friends have less ardor than old ones, he said to me as he embraced me, they will be old friends in their turn, and will yield nothing to others. My heart was exhausted. I received his embraces passively. When we reached the drawing-room, she disappeared for a moment and returned, not alone. She brought her 2 children with her, darling little boys, who bore on their countenances the charm and the fascination of their mother. 1,000 thoughts rushed in my mind. I could not speak. I took them in my arms and welcomed their innocent caresses. The children withdrew, and Monsieur de Volmar was called away. I was alone with Julie. I was conscious of a painful restraint. She was seemingly at ease, and I became gradually reassured. We talked of my travels and of her married life. There was no mention of our old relations. I came to realize how Julie was changed, and yet the same. She is a matron, the happy mother of children, the happy mistress of a prosperous household. Her old love is not extinguished, but it is subdued by domestic peace and by her unalterable virtue. Let me add, by the trust and kindness of her elderly husband, whose unemotional goodness has been just what was needed to soothe her passion and sorrow. I am her old and dear friend. I can never be more. And believe me, I am content. Occasionally, pangs of regret tear at my heart, but they do not last long. My passion is cured, and I can never experience another. How can I describe to you the peace and felicity that reign in this household? Monsieur de Volmar is, above all things, a man of system. The life of the establishment moves with ordered regularity from the year's beginning to its end. But the system is not mechanical. It is founded on wide experience of men and governed by philosophy. In the home life of Julie and her husband and children, luxury is never permitted. Even the table delicacies are simple products of the country. But without luxury, there is perfect comfort and perfect confidence. I have never known a community so thoroughly happy, and it is a deep joy to me to be admitted as a cherished member of it. One day, Monsieur de Volmar drew Julie and myself aside, and where do you think he took us? To a plantation near the house which Julie had never entered since her marriage. It was there that she had first kissed me. She was unwilling to enter the place, but he drew her along with him and bade us be seated. Then he began, "Julie, I knew the secret of your love before you revealed it to me. I knew it before I married you. I may have been in the wrong to marry you, knowing that your heart was elsewhere, but I loved you, and I believed I could make you happy. Have I succeeded?"
My dear husband, you know you have succeeded,
said Julie in tears. "One thing only," he went on, "was necessary to prove to you that your old passion was powerless against your virtue, and that was the presence of your old lover. I trusted you. I believed from my knowledge of you that I could trust him. I invited him here, and since then I have been quietly watching. My high anticipations of him are justified. As for you, Julie, the haunting fears that your virtue would fail before the test inflicted by the return of your lover have once and for all been put to rest. Past wounds are healed. Monsieur," he added, turning to me, "you have proved yourself worthy of our fullest confidence and our warmest friendship." What could I answer? I could but embrace him in silence. Madame d'Orbe, now a widow, is about to come here to take permanent charge of the household, leaving Julie to devote herself to the training of the children. Hasten to join us, my lord. Your coming is anxiously awaited. For my own part, I shall not be content until you have looked with your own eyes upon the peaceful delights of our life at Clarence. From St. Preux to my Lord Edouard. Madame d'Orbe is now with us. We look forward to you to complete the party. When you have made a long stay at Clarence, I shall be ready to join you in your projected journey to Rome. Julie has revealed to me the one trouble of her life. Her husband is a free thinker. Will you aid me in trying to convince him of his error and thus perfecting Julie's happiness? Section 4. The Veil. From St. Preux to Madame d'Orbe. My Lord Edward and I, after leaving you all yesterday, succeeded no further than Villeneuve. An accident to one of my lord's attendants delayed us, and we spent the night there. As you know, I had parted from Julie with regret, but without violent emotion. Yet, strangely enough, when I was alone last night, the old grief came back. I had lost her. She lived and was happy. Her life was my death. Her happiness was my torment. I struggled with these ideas. When I lay down, they pursued me in my sleep. At length I started up from a hideous dream. I had seen Julie stretched upon her deathbed. I knew it was she, although her face was covered by a veil. I advanced to tear it off. I could not reach it. "Be calm, my friend," she said feebly. "The veil of dread covers me. No hand can remove it." I made another effort and awoke. Again I slept. Again I dreamt the dream. A third time I slept, and a third time it appeared to me. This was too much. I fled from my room to my Lord Edward's. At first he treated the dream as a jest, but seeing my panic-stricken earnestness, he changed his tune. "You will have a chance of recovering your reason tomorrow," he said. The next morning we set out on our journey, as I thought. Brooding over my dream, I never noticed that the lake was on the left-hand side of the carriage, that we were returning. When I roused myself, I found that we were back again at Clarence. "Now, go and see her again. Prove that the dream was wrong," said Edward. I went nervously, feeling thoroughly ashamed of myself. I could hear you and Julie talking in the garden. I was cured in an instant of my superstitious folly. It fled from my mind. I retired without seeing her, feeling a man again. I rejoined my Lord Edward and drove back to Villeneuve. We are about to resume the journey to Rome.
From Madame de Orbe, Claire, to Saint Preux, Julie's lover. Why did you not come to see us, instead of merely listening to our voices? You have transfixed the terror of your dream to me. Until your return, I shall never look upon Julie without trembling, lest I should lose her. Monsieur de Voulemar has let you know his wish that you should remain permanently with us and superintend the education of his children. I am sure you will accept. Rejoin us swiftly, then. I shall not have an easy moment until you are amongst us once more. From Madame de Orbe to Saint Preux. It has come to pass. You will never see her more. The veil, Julie is dead.
From Monsieur de Volmar to Saint Preux. I have allowed your first hours of grief to pass in silence. I was in no condition to give details, nor you to receive them. Now I may write, and you may read. We were on a visit to the castle of Chillon, guests of the Baillie of Vevey. After dinner, the whole party walked on the ramparts, and our youngest son slipped and fell into the deep water. Julie plunged in after him. Both were rescued. The child was soon brought round, but Julie's state was critical. When she recovered a little, she was taken back to Clarence. The doctor told her she had but 3 days to live. She spent those 3 days in perfect cheerfulness and tranquillity of spirit, conversing with Madame de Orbe, the pastor, and myself, expressing her content that her life should end at a time when she had attained complete happiness. On the 4th morning, we found her lifeless. During the 3 days, she wrote a letter which I enclose. Fulfill her last requests. There yet remains much for you to do on earth.
From Julie to Saint Preux. All is changed, my dear friend. Let us suffer the change without a murmur. It was not well for us that we should rejoin each other, for it was an illusion that my love for you was cured. Now, in the presence of death, I know that I still love you. I avow this without shame, for I have done my duty. My virtue is without stain, my love without remorse. Come back to Clarence. Train my children. Comfort their noble father. Lead him into the light of Christian faith. Claire, like yourself, is about to lose the half of her life. Let each of you preserve the other half by a union that in these latter days I have often wished to bring about. Adieu, sweet friend. Adieu. This ends the new Heloise. Excerpts from Julie, the New Heloise by Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Love in a Cottage by Frances A. Durivage. Recorded for Love Stories Volume 3 by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Love in a Cottage by Frances A. Durivage. Tell me, Charlie, who is that fascinating creature in blue that waltzes so divinely? Asked young Frank Belmont of his friend Charles Hastings, as they stood playing wallflower for the moment at a military ball. Julia Heathcote, answered Charles with a half-sigh, an old flame of mine. I proposed, but she refused me. On what ground? Simply because I had a comfortable income. Her head is full of romantic notions, and she dreams of nothing but love in a cottage. She contends that poverty is essential to happiness, and money its bane. Have you given up all hopes of her? Entirely. In fact, I'm engaged. Then you have no objections to my addressing this dear romantic angel? None whatever. But I see my fiancée. Excuse me, I must walk through the next quadrille with her. Frank Belmont was a stranger in Boston, a New Yorker, immensely rich and fashionable, but his reputation had not preceded him, and Charlie Hastings was the only man who knew him in New England. He procured an introduction to the beauty from one of the managers, and soon danced and talked himself into her good graces. In fact, it was a clear case of love at first sight on both sides. The enamored pair were sitting apart, enjoying a most delightful tete-a-tete. Suddenly, Belmont heaved a deep sigh. "Oh, why do you sigh, Mr. Belmont?" asked the fair Julia, somewhat pleased with this proof of sensibility. "Is this not a gay scene?" "Alas, yes," replied Belmont gloomily, "but fate does not permit me to mingle habitually in scenes like this. They only make my ordinary life doubly gloomy, and even here I deem to see the shadow of a fiend waving me away. What right have I to be here?" "What fiend do you allude to?" asked Miss Heathcote with increasing interest. "A fiend hardly presentable in good society," replied Belmont bitterly. "One could tolerate a Mephistopheles, a dignified fiend, with his pockets full of money, but my tormentor, if personified, would appear with seedy boots and a shocking bad hat." "How absurd!" "It is too true," sighed Belmont, "and the name of this fiend is poverty." "Are you poor?" "Yes, madame, I am poor, and when I would fain render myself agreeable in the eyes of beauty, in the eyes of one I could love, this fiend whispers to me, 'Beware, you have nothing to offer her but love in a cottage.'" "Mr. Belmont," said Julia with sparkling eyes and a voice of unusual animation, "although there are sordid souls in this world who only judge of the merits of an individual by his pecuniary possessions, I am not one of that number. I respect poverty. There is something highly poetical about it, and I imagine that happiness is oftener found in the humble cottage than beneath the palace roof." Belmont appeared enchanted with this encouraging avowal. The next day, after cautioning his friend Charlie to say nothing of his actual circumstances, he called on the widow Heathcote and her fair daughter in the character of the poor gentleman. The widow had very different notions from her romantic offspring, and when Belmont candidly confessed his poverty on soliciting permission to address Julia, he was very politely requested to change the subject and never mention it again. The result of all this maneuvering was an elopement. The belle of the ball jumping out of a chamber window on a shed and coming down a flight of steps to reach her lover, for the sake of being romantic, when she might just as well have walked out the front door. The happy couple passed a day in New York City, and then Frank took his beloved to his cottage. An Irish hack conveyed them to a miserable shanty in the environs of New York, where they alighted, and Frank, escorting the bride into the apartment, which served for parlor, kitchen, and drawing-room, and was neither papered nor carpeted, introduced her to his mother, much in the way Claude Melnotte presents Pauline. The old woman, who was peeling potatoes, hastily wiped her hands and face with a greasy apron and saluted her daughter, as she called her, on both cheeks. "Can it be possible," thought Julia, "that this vulgar creature is my Belmont's mother?" "Frank," screamed the old woman, "you'd better go right upstairs and take off them clothes, for the boy's been sent arter 'em more'n 50 times. Frank borrowed the clothes, ma'am," she added to Julia by way of explanation, "to look smart when he went down east." The bridegroom retired on this hint, and soon reappeared in a pair of faded nankeen pantaloons, reaching to about the calf of the leg, a very shabby black coat, out at the elbows, a ragged black vest, and instead of his varnished leather boots, a pair of immense cowhide brogans. "Now," said he, sitting quietly down by the cooking stove, "I began to feel at home. Ah, this is delightful, isn't it, dearest?" And he warbled, "Though never so humble, there's no place like home." Julia's heart swelled so that she could not utter a word. "Dearest," said Frank, "I think you told me you had no objections to smoking?" "None in the least," said the bride. "I rather like the flavor of a cigar." "Oh, a cigar," replied Belmont. "That would never do for a poor man." And, oh horror! He produced an old clay pipe, and filling it from a little newspaper parcel of tobacco, began to smoke with keen relish. "Dinner! Dinner!" he exclaimed at length. "Ah, thank you, mother. I'm as hungry as a bear. Codfish and potatoes, Julia. Not a very tempting fare, but what of that? Our aliment is love." "Yes, and by way of a treat," added the old woman, "I've been and gone and bought a whole pint of Albany ale and 3 cream cakes from the candy shop next block." Poor Julia pleaded indisposition and could not eat a mouthful. Before Belmont, however, the codfish and potatoes and the ale and cream cakes disappeared with a very unromantic and unlover-like velocity. At the close of the meal, a thundering